Welcome to our next Adventures in Cataloging webinar. Today we're going to be talking about serials management. So our goal today really is to get an idea of how the serials functionality works in Evergreen. Some of the workflows that we talk about, some of the individual processes may differ from how you currently manage serials in your library. That's okay if you've got a workflow that works for you. You don't have to change it to match some of the things that I talk about today, but it's a chance to kind of talk about how all the pieces really fit together within a fairly complex section of Evergreen. So today we're going to be talking about just sort of a quick review of serials, how they differ from regular cataloging, and how Evergreen kind of handles that. We'll be talking about the structure of serial records and templates. We'll talk about setting up a new serial item, predicting issues, and receiving issues. We will also do a little bit of troubleshooting at the end if we have time. One of the things to kind of note about serials as we get started is that there are really a lot of different moving parts to serial management. Aren't necessarily going to touch on each detail today or go into a great deal of detail about those details, but what we're hoping to do is really get an idea of how the pieces all fit together. It's possible that depending on how your library manages serials, your actual work with these materials may only touch a small part of what we cover today. That being said, I do think it's important to understand what's happening at both ends of the process. So even if you don't work directly with each step that we talk about today, kind of knowing how that step impacts what you're doing as on a regular basis will help with troubleshooting and things when problems come up. There are some issues that tend to come up in serials that we don't really see in other areas of Evergreen, and understanding that full picture helps a lot with avoiding those problems in the first place, but also then, troubleshooting them if they do come up. If you are brand new to serials, or your library does not currently use this workflow, but you're curious about how it might streamline your management of these materials, then we will have some basic information as well. So those of you who are, old hands with serials uh, may be a little advanced for some of what we cover today, but I wanted to make sure we also have some sort of introductory information for those of you who may be in a new role or working with these materials for the first time, or just curious to see what's available. I'm hoping those of you who are here for those reasons kind of come away with a clear idea of how to get started, and really whether or not you even want to move forward using this module if you're curious about implementing it at your library. I do encourage you to ask questions as we go, so put those in chat, or if I present something one way and your library does it another way quite successfully, feel free to share that in the chat as well. Serials is quite flexible. Once you kind of understand the structure of it. So understanding how other libraries are doing things can also be really useful. So I do encourage you to share that as we go along. All right, so we're going to start with just a really quick review of serials. As I was putting this together, I kind of found myself drawing back on a lot of the fundamental stuff that I learned about serials cataloging and management a long time ago. A very long time ago. But I did find that thinking about things from the perspective that I learned them in like my serials management class in library school was really helpful with understanding what Evergreen was doing. There are some aspects of the workflow that are a little bit opaque. But if you think about, what are you really doing when cataloging serials, it starts to make a little bit more sense. So before we dive into what Evergreen's doing, I kind of wanted to talk briefly about just the process of cataloging serials in at all. Um, you know, it's very basic stuff, and I am not a serials cataloger and have not cataloged a serial for over a decade. But so we're not going to go into a great deal of detail, but I just wanted to kind of start at this foundational point. So first of all, what is a serial? I'm assuming that most of you who are here today have an answer to that question, but I wanted to make sure we were all starting from the same definition because that is actually an important distinction within Evergreen. So a serial It's a publication that's issued in successive parts to be continued indefinitely with numeric or chronological designations. Basically, what this means is that new issues come out periodically. That's why we call it a periodical. And there's no definite end. So this would differ, of course, from a book series where even if that book series is ongoing, the final novel in the series has not yet been published, a time will come when that series concludes. We may not know what that time is yet, but there will be a definitive end to that series. And so that's one of those key distinctions. Obviously, there are some things that blur the lines a bit, and I did want to address that. The idea of like an ongoing manga series, for example, may feel a lot like a serial because when you get to the point that you have hundreds of individual volumes and publication is continuing and it feels fairly indefinite, not close-ended, that's going to feel like a serial. Comic books are even more so because you do get that sort of numerical designation with volumes and issues. Um, and so that can get confusing. For our purposes within NC Cardinal, we very distinctly ask you to treat manga, and if your library does get individual issues of comic books, those as well as a book series, a monograph series, not as serial publications. I'm not ready to get into a deep discussion about that because I am not a cataloger and I don't have any experience with those things at all. But I'm happy to facilitate that discussion if that's something people are interested in. And of course, certainly if that's something you wanted to talk about, I definitely recommend that Basecamp can be a great place for a very lively discussion about that. But I did want to just sort of point out that within NC Cardinal, we make very clear distinctions between serials and book series. And essentially anything in that kind of manga, graphic novel, comic book um, designation would be cataloged as a book series, not as a serial publication. So when we're talking today about serials, we're really specifically talking about periodicals in public libraries. That's primarily going to be magazines, newspapers. You also might see annuals. So this could be, yearbooks. It could be an annual report from some sort of society, that type of thing. Academic journals, and then in some cases you might find a numbered monographic series. That's not something that we will deal with a whole lot within the context of today. But there are monographic series that are indefinitely published in that way, like a serial, and they may sometimes be treated as serials. So if your library does have something like that potentially in your special collections or local history, that may be a consideration. Um, Generally, it may be easier to catalog those as books and book series. But primarily what we're talking about today are periodicals and newspapers because that's what most public libraries generally are dealing with serials, and those are the ones that the Evergreen serial module is really focused on. Before we really get into how to work with these materials in Evergreen, I did want to talk about why we're even bothering with this. I think a lot of people outside of libraries definitely have a perception that this type of media is kind of dying. And the idea of, having them in libraries may be surprising to people outside of libraries. I think most of the people here obviously don't necessarily share that perspective, but I did want to just share some numbers that I had. About 18% of our libraries currently catalog serials. Now, we may have more libraries who use serials in some sense, who subscribe to them, but simply don't catalog them. And so, that is one option for those of you who may be attending today or watching this in the recording who don't currently catalog serials, but do subscribe to them. Thinking about how adding them into Evergreen may help streamline your workflow within that process. So currently we've got 18% of our libraries who are using the modules that we're talking about today, with about just under 2,600 different active serial records right now. So meaning active titles throughout the entirety of NC Cardinal. And then last year we had about 10,000 individual issues that were checked out. So, this isn't necessarily a huge chunk of the activity that's happening with NC Cardinal, but it's not non-existent. So we see that this is still something that our libraries are using, and this is still something that the patrons of those libraries are taking advantage of that option. And that's not even counting those who may just go in and browse a magazine while physically in the library space, but not actually check it out. So, and it also is not going to be counting those materials that are purchased for library staff and maybe sort of delivered around to staff, because there is functionality in Evergreen to facilitate that as well. So, if your library gets library journal and passes it around to staff, you can actually track that within Evergreen and create sort of a distribution flow and everything if you are interested in that. So now that we know a little bit more about serials and what they're like within sort of the current NC Cardinal environment, let's talk about the actual structure of them within Evergreen. So just like with other materials, there are distinct parts that sort of start out broadly, covering a wide range of potential items and narrow until you get to one specific barcoded copy that can be checked in and out. So with a book, obviously we think of the bibliographic record, the volume or call number, and then the individual copies that could be found at that call number. Serials maintain each of those pieces. Each serial that circulates is going to have a bib record, it's going to have a call number, and it's going to have a barcode. But outside of that, there are other aspects to the serials record structure that are specific to serials. Because serials themselves are a bit different. So this difference in structure has a pretty significant impact on the workflow. And people working with serials will really be entering into a very different area of Evergreen than you would use for standard cataloging. Even when we're talking about the bib record aspect of this or the item attribute aspect of this, the way that you'll be working with those records is kind of siloed away from the standard cataloging workflow. There is definitely some crossover at the bib record point, but that's about it. Everything else very much linked to standard cataloging practices, but within its own interface. So the biggest thing to note with serials is that because so much of the cataloging details have to do with maintaining and displaying holdings information, our library has been subscribing to this since this year and has these issues available. Much of the underlying work with serials really involves understanding and preparing for the frequency of issuance. So unlike with monographic catalog structure, which starts with that bib or title record, and then you attach holdings first as call numbers and then as copies to those bib records. Serial records actually start with a template, which functionally speaking is similar to the attribute templates that you create for your items in standard cataloging. So with serials, you're starting out by creating a template that's going to define item attributes. And then you move through from there to apply those templates out at the bib record level and the subscription level and the issue level. So the bib record is very similar to a standard monograph bib record. In fact, this is the point that is most like standard cataloging. And if there is not currently a bib record for the title that you'll be subscribing to, you'll actually import that bib record in the same way you would for a monograph bib record. So whether you use Z3950 or you import using the batch uploader, or you create the record yourself, all of those options are available for serial records as well. I think the most standard way that our libraries get these bib records, get their holdings attached to these bib records, though, is to find an existing bib record in Evergreen. And just like with books and other materials, we ask you to share bib records. So if your library is just starting a subscription to Southern Living, you'll want to find the existing Southern Living bib record within NC Cardinal and attach from there rather than creating your own. But so the title is really very similar to what you'd find for any other type of resource. And this is basically going to refer to the specific publication and then the bib record that represents that publication. So Southern Living or Sports Illustrated or something like that, that's going to be your bib record. Um, After determining what your template's going to look like, if you're already working with serials, you probably have an existing template. We generally would recommend that you don't create templates for individual titles, but instead create a general template that's going to apply to a large number of titles. So you might have adult circulating magazines. Every adult magazine that you have come in that's going to be available for circulation would utilize this template rather than having one template for Sports Illustrated and one for Southern Living. You'll have one for adult circulating magazine and then apply that out to those individual titles. So once you've determined that you either have the template you need or you've created a template that will work for the type of magazine that you're subscribing to, then you'll make sure that there's a bib record in NC Cardinal for that title. If there is, then that's when you'll use. If there's not, then you'll use whatever standard practice you use to import a bib record generally. And once you've got that, then you've got the template, which is going to determine a lot about how this item will actually function once you have individual issues. And you also, of course, then have that bib record that's going to be searchable within the catalog. The next step is where serials vary significantly from monographs in that this is the subscription level. So when you have the title, that tells you this is Southern Living. When you have the subscription, this tells you exactly how Southern Living is published. It's the collection of volumes and then the schedule of recurrence for issues within those volumes. So your subscription, if you have an annual subscription to a title, then your subscription will be sort of divided out into years. So you'll have Southern Living 2025 for this year. And that is sort of a specific unit attached to the bib record. And within the subscription level, that's when we really determine things like how many issues to expect, when we expect those issues, and if there's any sort of special issues that would come in, if there's an index that comes out at the end of the year, or if the July and August issues are combined into a single issue, that's going to be held at the subscription level. And then finally, you have the individual issues. In a lot of ways, these are functionally very much like a copy would be on a monograph record, but you're going to be working with them in a completely different area of Evergreen. So, you know, the way that you'll be functioning with them is not very much like when you're working with book holdings or anything like that. But the issue is really that single circulating item, the thing with the barcode on it. So for this example, if you've got Southern Living and then you have your 2025 subscription to Southern Living, then you have the issue that is April 2025. And the way that you set up your subscription will help you to determine that April 2025 will be an issue, when to expect it, and what to do if you don't receive it. So we're going to kind of work our way through this structure a little bit today. We're going to start at the beginning with templates and the process of setting up templates. And this may be something that if you work with serials daily, this may be a part of the workflow that you haven't that you've either never touched or maybe have not touched in many years. So it might be a good idea to just sort of periodically check back in on this to kind of take a look. What templates do you have? Are they all in use? Are there any that maybe you should have that you don't? And just kind of make sure that those areas are kind of clean and organized and ready to apply out as you get new subscriptions. Or as you cancel subscriptions, there may be templates you no longer need. So the first thing you'll do to create a template is you'll select the serial item template from the serials admin menu. So if you have not really worked with the administrative side of serials before, you do have your own admin menu. I'll show you where that is. So it's under administration, and then it's just here under serials administration. Just like with any admin portal, you do have a splash page. There are only two things on the splash page, so it's pretty easy to navigate. So for the templates, we're going to go into serial item templates. And then from here, obviously you'll want to scope to your library. If you're not there automatically, it should scope you there based on your workstation. But if you're going to be creating templates for other branches in your system or something, you may need to scope manually. And then you'll just create a new one using the button at the top, and you'll fill in the basic attributes. And these attributes are similar to what you see when you're doing holdings attributes. We do recommend that you keep these on the generic side, and that you kind of give them those generic names. As I said earlier, rather than having a template that you then apply to each individual title, having a single template that works for for multiple titles is generally our recommendation for this. So you may have, based on its shelving location, how it circulates, that type of thing. So it's fairly straightforward. Let's go ahead and just create one now. We'll click Create Template. We would name it. So let's do this one, Juvenile Circulating Magazine. And so then I could apply this to anything that I have in my juvenile collection that circulates, whether it's National Geographic or Sports Illustrated for kids or anything like that. It is going to circulate, and I can set a status if I have something like all my children's magazines are held at the children's desk. I can set that. I can also set this manually later on in the process. For now, I'm going to say that our standard will be at the children's desk. The circulating library, so I'm going to set this for the same library that I am working in right now. It is not reference. Our juvenile magazines, I'm going to put here in juvenile magazine. Of course, its shelving location is somewhat moot because its status is at children's desk, but if we ever did change that, or maybe the first one is at the children's desk and then later issues get shelved, I want to go ahead and have both of these set. If I want this to be something that patrons see in the OPAC, I'll set that to yes. Our circ modifier is magazine. And I'm going to make it not holdable. And that's it. These are the attributes that I want to apply to each new issue as it is received. So you can change these manually at different points in the cataloging process, but this will be sort of the basic thing that is applied to each issue. And as we move forward through this process, you'll see where that application happens. I'll go ahead and save that. And so now I do have two different magazine types that I can have here at PAC. So I've got an adult circulating and a juvenile circulating. So we'll move on to the next step, but we'll be coming back to templates when we're ready to apply them. So our next step is the prediction pattern template. So there are two different types of templates within Evergreen. The first one is that sort of attribute template that we just did. The second one is a little bit more complicated, and it is definitely specific to serials, and that's the prediction pattern. This is when you basically tell Evergreen how you expect certain magazines to come in. So basically, this is where you say, when I subscribe to Southern Living, which is an annual subscription, I expect 12 issues and I expect them monthly. So you set up a prediction pattern that would follow that. And then when you're cataloging that particular title, you apply that prediction pattern to it. So, depending on what your subscriptions look like, you may have a lot of different prediction patterns, or you may only have one or two. If you only get a few magazines and they're all monthly, you only need that one prediction pattern for that monthly type of magazine. But because serials can be unique, you may have one annual subscription that sends 10 issues and another annual subscription that sends 12 and another one that sends 12 regular issues plus 2 supplements throughout the year. And then of course you may have biannual or bi-monthly subscriptions. And so you'll need prediction patterns for each of these types of subscriptions. So unfortunately, you may find that these start to wind out of control. You can set them up as you're setting up an individual subscription. You can create the prediction patterns manually. For your basic prediction patterns, those that are going to be used over and over again, I do recommend that you have a template for it though. If you end up having issues in the prediction patterns that you set up, that can really mess with your ability to receive. Um, and then poorly received items can then mess up your ability to create new prediction patterns. So it really becomes sort of this cycle that becomes very difficult to manage. So I do recommend really thinking about what are your subscriptions, what patterns do they arrive in, and getting the right number of templates for those. You don't want too many where you're basically applying the same prediction pattern over and over again, but using a different template for each of them, because then it can be difficult to troubleshoot. But you also don't want too few where you're putting the wrong prediction pattern on some titles. So just, spending a little bit of time taking a look at what you receive and how that comes in can really save some headaches down the road. So the prediction pattern basically is used to predict the frequency and number of issues each year. Um, just like other templates, you can share these with other staff users in your library. And they are also created in the admin portal. Before we get into that, into creating one, let's take a look about some of the details that we find within a prediction pattern. So some of the things that you'll see as you're working through the prediction pattern template is that it has multiple tabs and you kind of have to go through each tab as you go. And I'll be honest, I find the navigation of this modal incredibly frustrating because depending on which boxes you click and things like that, different things show up and they don't always show up where you'd expect them to show up. And sometimes you don't realize that's what you've skipped, and that's why it won't let you move forward because it will not let you move forward until you've filled out everything you need for a specific tab. Your first tab is going to be enumeration. This is basically your volume and issue numbers. So this does conform to part of the MARC record for the serial records. So in the 853 and 854 tag as well as 855. So, you know, there's a world where this stuff can be set kind of manually within the record, but because of our shared records, of course, we're not really necessarily doing that. And it's also theoretically a lot easier to go through the prediction pattern template wizard. So to do the enumeration, you'll want to figure out, is your volume a number or is your volume based on the year? How many issues do you get per volume? All of that type of stuff. So let's take a quick look at this tab. So we'll go back into serials administration and we'll go into prediction patterns. And I'm just going to create a new one. All right, so here's my pattern wizard. So as I said, we've got tabs and I cannot move through these tabs until I've finished a tab. So I can't move into chronology until I finish enumeration. So enumeration, as I said, is basically your volume and issues. So I can use enumeration or I can use calendar dates. And for a lot of popular magazines, this may be the way you want to go. Most popular magazines are going to, they'll designate their volumes and issues as, the year and the month. Rather than by some sort of number. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. And if you are looking out at a publication that uses a volume number enumeration, go ahead and stick with that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and set this up to use calendar dates. And that makes it a lot easier because I can click straight into next. I don't have to do anything else if I've determined to use calendar dates. If I was enumerating, I actually have to set the level of enumeration. So for this, I would just put in vol, short for volume, and number. Or I could just do V, actually. I think that's the standard. So I would put in my levels of enumeration. I can add another level. So you notice that when I only had one level, the add level button was right here. When I add another level, it moves all the way over here. So that's what I'm talking about when I say sometimes things don't appear where you expect them to. Once you do add another level, you do have the ability to say that once you finish a unit, you'll restart the numbering, or that the numbering continually gets larger. So again, this is based on what the subscription does, what the magazine does. So I'm going to choose restarts at unit completion for this. And I can also set a specific number. So if I know each volume contains exactly 12 issues, I can set that here by choosing number from this dropdown and then putting in that number. If you're not sure ahead of time, if this subscription does not tell you how many to expect, then you would choose undetermined. If it varies from year to year, you'd choose varies, but I'm going to choose numbers. You can also do alternative enumeration. So, if you have a magazine that uses both volume and issue, or if you have a magazine that, this is volume 25, issue 3, but it's also, issue number, I can't do that math, issue number 75. And so it both sort of does a volume number enumeration as well as just a total number of issues in the entire run in the history of the magazine. Then you can add that as an alternative. And so what this is really doing is it's determining not only how to expect new issues, but then how to label those issues. And that labeling will show up in the catalog in your holdings. So it's important to kind of make sure that you're matching the standard labeling process for the subscription that you'll be applying this template to. So, there may be some kind of oddball publications out there where you create one prediction pattern template for that publication, and that's the only one because it's the only one that functions this particular way. But you still want to create that template, I think, because if you're doing it fully manually, issues might arise later. And we'll talk about those when we're looking at receiving. So you can add an alternative enumeration if you need to. And then also there are some publications I know that the enumeration changes in the middle of the subscription year. So, your volume number may change in July, even though your subscription technically runs from January to December or something like that. So if you have one of those, you'll also check this box. I am going to come back here though and switch us back to calendar dates, just because that is a little bit more standard with most of the publications that we have in NC Cardinal. So whether I've chosen enumeration or calendar dates, with enumeration, once I filled everything out, with calendar dates as soon as I choose it, once I'm done here, I can either click next or just click direct. Actually, nope, I can only click next. So I'll click next to get into chronology display. And so this is how your holdings are actually going to be displayed within the OPAC. So I can choose to use captions or not. We do recommend that you use captions. And then you'll just choose your year as your first level most of the time, depending on the subscription. It's possible that it may go differently. If you have an hourly publication, that sounds like a lot of work, basically, but we're going to just set year here. And then I can add level. So I can also have my month as my second caption. So it'll give me the year and month and in those captions. Now I can display the level descriptor in my captions so that it says, year is 2025, month is April. We don't recommend that you do that just because it does make those non-standard in the catalog. And we are trying to make, because of those shared records, we are trying to make the holdings information as standard as possible. It's also just, it's more information and the records start to become difficult to read the more stuff you try to pack into one. So I definitely would not recommend doing that, but you can. Simply, if you click this box, then you'll include year. If you click this box, you'll include month. You can add additional levels. So, if you have a subscription that comes out weekly and is labeled then as 2025 April week 1 or something like that, you can do that. If you have one that has sort of its own unique little way of doing its chronology, then you can add that as well. So, if you have, I can't even think of an example of how a publication might do this, but you can add basically a secondary type of chronology caption. I'm not going to do that right now. and I'm going to remove my weekly chronology there. So this basically means that I am enumerating by year and month, and then the captions themselves will also be by year and month as you see them in the holdings information. Once I filled this out, I can go on to next, and this is the MFHD indicators. Now, honestly, we're not going to talk a lot about MFHD today. We'll talk about it a bit. So MFHD stands for Mark Format for Holdings Display, and this basically determines how those holding notes will display in the record. So you've determined what those holding notes are. The MFHD determines what they'll actually look like in the record. So really the only options you have to set at this point in the template are how they're compressed. So you can determine whether or not they compress and expand. So when you're first looking at the holdings information, it's all compressed out, and then you can expand it out to be more readable. I am just going to say no on that. And then basically you're saying whether or not they're verified and they're correct. So if you have, holdings that you're not sure that you're going to have every issue of, or even that you don't have every issue of, you can actually sort of put this in here to kind of to note that this may not be a complete subscription. I'm just going to say that it is. So that's all you're doing with MFHD at this point. There is some more stuff that you can do with it manually on a serial record. If we have time, we may take a look at that, but most likely we're not going to get to it. There's not a lot that you need to worry about with it at this point, though. And then you'll set your frequency. So generally speaking, if you're looking at a fairly standard annual magazine subscription, you can just use the number of issues per year and then put that number in. And so once you've done that, then that's going to set the prediction pattern based on that number. Otherwise, you can use one of these patterns that exists. So you can say that, something is a biweekly or a monthly or something like that, and it's going to set that prediction pattern up for you based on that. I would recommend if you're looking at anything other than a monthly subscription, that this is probably how you do it, especially if it's, one of these kind of like multiple times a week and stuff like that, just because those numbers can get kind of funky over the course of the year. But if you're looking at just a once a month, annual subscription, then just basing it off of the number of issues per year is going to work well for you. If you do have one of those magazines that has something kind of interesting going on, then you can combine months, and then you can apply that as needed. I am not going to work with that today though, so I'm going to uncheck that. And so once I've done this, I'll just review it, make sure this is what's going to show up in my holdings information for any title that I apply this prediction pattern to. And if that's what I want, then that's what I'm going to go with. If I feel that this is incorrect, I can go back and fix it. And once I apply this prediction pattern, that's going to make it so that the holdings show up. It's also going to give me a list of magazine or issues that I expect to receive over the course of the year. And then I can work with that list when it gets to the point of receiving. And so this is how we recommend that you set this stuff up. It is possible to just create issues as you go, but that can lead to a lot of problems, especially if you're dealing with a situation of missed issues and things like that. It also makes it very difficult to set up new subscriptions. So if this year's subscription ends and next year starts, I'm sort of starting from scratch rather than being able to just say, all right, let's continue on the same way this year. So I definitely recommend using the patterns. So I'll save that. All right. So those are So we have set up a prediction pattern. So those are our two templates that we have to work with. Are there any questions about templates before we move into the kind of daily workflow? So this is the administrative side of things, which often, of course, may not be something that you work with very often. You may have set it up once 5 years ago and haven't looked at it since. If that's the case, I recommend taking a look at it, going back, seeing what templates you have. Are they all in use? Are they all accurate? If every time you're setting up a new year, a new subscription, you're having to do a lot of sort of manual work to get your predictions set up and everything, it may be worth going back and seeing what kind of prediction patterns do you have that you can apply to kind of make to streamline that process. So I definitely recommend that if you have not looked at this in a while, that you go back and take a look and just make sure that you have everything that you need and not too much that you don't need. So from there, the next thing we're going to talk about is setting up a new subscription. So this can mean setting up a new subscription from scratch. Our library's never gotten Southern Living before, and now we're getting Southern Living. So we've got to figure out every aspect of it. Or it can just mean I'm setting up this year's subscription to Southern Living. We've gotten it every year for the last 10 years, and so there's not a whole lot to it except to figure out which issues we expect this year. So setting up a subscription can kind of run the gamut from starting from scratch to just figuring out predictions. But we're going to pretend we're starting from scratch so that we can look at every piece along the way. So the first thing that you'll need to do is make sure you've got a bib record. Now, as I said earlier, the bib record portion of serials is the same as for monographs in the sense that these are shared records. And if you can't find one that exists in the catalog, you can get one in there using any of the same methods that you would. So you can start by trying to find one, and that's what I recommend you do. If you can't find it, you can import it if you have one from the vendor, or you can see if you can find it in Z3950 and import or overlay from there. And if you feel, if it's some sort of local publication that it's not really going to be out there in any other form, you can also create one from scratch, the way you could create any bib record. So all of these options are available. If you are choosing to try to find an existing record, then you would start by simply doing a search in the catalog. And when you set your format, you can set that, not to picture, to serials and magazines and complete your search. And we will find, I think, that a number of these will be, the record for the microform or something like that. But overall, we should. I don't know if any of you have been having extreme slowness with the catalog lately, but I have. So you will want to make sure that you're looking closely. Check the format icon to make sure it's a serial and not a microform or something like that. You also want to make sure, for a lot of these publications, there are sort of sub publications. So like, the Travel South or recipes or things like that. You're going to want to make sure that you're not choosing one of those to apply your own subscription to. But once you find the one that you want, you'll just click on it. And so, at this point, it's not that different from how you would work with a monograph bib record. But starting at the next step, it's going to get different because instead of coming down here and working with the holdings or adding new holdings or anything like that, we're going to come up here to the serials button. So if you already subscribe, you can just do a quick receive. That's going to get you into an interface where you can just click on receive for the issue that you have, and you're done. Now, I did mention that MFHD is something that we're probably not going to get into a lot today, but this is where you would go to work with it. And so if that's something that people have a lot of questions on, we can set up another kind of a follow-up webinar where we're really looking into the details of this stuff. We're really talking about the bib record aspect of it. But mostly at this point, we're just going to go into manage subscriptions. So this is where I would set up my subscription. I would figure out my predictions. I would be able to see all my issues. And then I can also do some MFHD work from here. So when managing a subscription, the first thing I need to do, if I'm setting up a new one, is click New Subscription. Now, if I'm just adding a new year to an existing subscription, I would want to find that. So I would put in my library here, and that would scope to any issues of this that are owned by my library. Um, and then I can just kind of work within this. I can add distribution to it. I can add a stream to it. We'll talk about what all that means in a moment. Um, I'm going to go ahead and set up a new subscription so you see what that process looks like. So I'll click New Subscription, and this just opens up another line of these same fields. So it's owned by wherever I am scoped to. I can change that. So if I'm setting this one up for East Asheville, I can do that. The start date would be when your subscription starts. So when this year's subscription actually begins. So I'm going to say that this started back in January. End date, you're generally going to leave blank. Offset, you can put this in. It is actually useful because a lot of magazines, it may be the April issue, but you receive it typically around March 15th. So if you, as a standard rule, expect an issue 2 weeks before the date on that issue, or even 2 weeks after the date on that issue or something like that. You can set that here. So I could do this. Oh gosh, how do I do this? -14, I think, would do that. And so that would set it 2 weeks ahead of time. I don't think many people actually do this. It's not necessary. It's helpful, especially if you get quite a lot, because it can help you see if something's late. But it doesn't matter a whole lot for a lot of the functionality that we'll be talking about today. So this is up to you, and I don't think a lot of people use it, but you can use it if you're interested. I'm actually not going to. Your label, typically this is going to be the library, the specific branch where this item is going to be circulating. If it's going to be floating or something like that, you may want to put something different in here as your label. Currently, it's set to be distributed where I'm cataloging it, but I'm going to change it to where it lives. My opaque display is going to be chronological, meaning that year and month. Now, the send to has to do with distribution. So if this is sort of an internal publication that you get that goes around to staff, then you can get that set in here. You can also say, this goes to a specific department or something like that. I can add distribution. So let's say that this is Library Journal, not Southern Living, and it goes around to all the staff. First, it's going to go around to all the staff at East Asheville. Then it's going to be sent to PAC. And then from PAC, I can set up I can have it sent to South Asheville, etc. Or I can say, it's distributed at East Asheville and it starts out in circulation, and then it moves to youth services or something like that. So I can do that. If you have things that you're going to be doing a lot of this distribution for, you can set that up to be pretty in depth in terms of where it's going around to. And you'll see later, you also have the ability to then print that list as part of your cataloging process. So once you've set all this stuff up, then you click save, and now, I need to fill this out. I'm just going to remove this one. I'll let that think for a second. So when managing subscriptions, you're basically from the bibliographic record, you're going into the serials menu, you're choosing manage subscriptions, you're making a new subscription if needed. A couple of details that we looked at, the start and end date. So this is going to be when your subscription begins. You don't need to fill in the end date unless it's a closed-ended publication. Your expected offset, that's the difference between the listed date of an issue and when you expect to receive it. Distributed at is the branch where an issue will circulate. To add multiple issues that circulate at different branches, you can also add multiple distribution. And then the label shows only when an issue is received. Generally, we recommend that you simply use the branch. Couple of other details, the OPAC display. This is how issues will be grouped in the OPAC. And so we definitely recommend chronological if that makes sense. So if the volume starts in January and ends in December, if it's anything else, we'd recommend enumeration. The receiving template, this is the holdings template that will determine the attributes. That's that template that we set up at the beginning. And it's going to be based on the owning library. And then the send to designates specific staff or departments who should receive the issue upon receipt. So this is going to be for those professional publications that kind of make their rounds to all of your staff. And you can add multiple options for that by clicking add item stream. So we've set up our subscription. Now we need to figure out our individual issues of that subscription. And to do that, this is where the prediction pattern comes in. So we made that nice template. We can apply that template now. Basically, you're going to select the subscription that you want to predict. You're going to select a template. You're going to choose the type that you are applying it to. You're going to click create, and then you're going to predict new issues. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to come into manage predictions, and I'm going to set this to the library I'm actually working in. So I have to select the subscription I want, which is in this this drop down. Of course, in this case, PAC doesn't actually get any magazines. So the only thing that they have showing up is that subscription that I have for them under managed subscriptions that I've created recently. So this will be the one that I'll choose. And then I want to choose the template that I want to apply. So I am seeing every template that is available, which is a very large number. You probably will only see those that are available within your library. So you won't have quite as intense of a list. I'm going to choose monthly. And then I'm going to choose the type of this. So this is going to be basic. If it's some sort of supplemental or index or something like that, then that's going to kind of go outside the existing prediction pattern. So basic is almost always what you're going to choose. And then I'm going to click predict new issues. This allows me to say what I want my enumeration labels to be. So I'm just going to put and then I want my chronology labels to be 2025 starting in April. And there will be 12 issues. So I'll save those. And it created my issues for me. See, it's popped me into the Manage Issues tab. I now have all of the expected issues. So it's actually got me up to 23 because I had, I've just created 12, but I already had 11. And then those will start on with May. That's the next one I can expect, and just moves through. And then it actually, because of how I've set it up, we've got it all the way out to 2027. And then it gives me just sort of the list of when I can expect them. If I had offset in this subscription, then this date would be different than this date. I do not have offset, so they're the same. And then it tells me what's the receiving template that's being that's being applied to this. So that template we set up at the very, very beginning that says how this is going to circulate, that's what this is going to be. And so that brings us into our next step, which is to receive issues. So receiving issues is fairly straightforward. Basically, you'll start from here at this manage issues. If you're not doing the rest of this setup and you're just going in to receive an issue, you'll still go to the bib record. You'll go to that serials menu. And then when it gets you into the serials kind of interface, you'll just go straight to the manage issues tab. Then you will click receive next right here. And I have it set to receive without barcoding. If I want a barcode, I need to click barcode on receive, and then I can click next. And then it's going to give me this pop-up where it gives me the ability to set my barcode. And so I can, I can set up my distribution stream here. So that thing that I set up during my subscription setup, I can apply it now if I have one to apply. And then I can also just, all I really need to do though, at minimum, is put in the barcode. Make sure this receive box is checked. And oh, I need to add a call number. That's what's going on here. So whatever your call number is, you'll need to make sure that that is added as well. So I've got my call number, I've got my barcode, and I click save. And now I have a receive date for this. So we expected it on the 1st. We actually received it on April 29th, but now it's been received and it's barcoded and it's ready to go out. As long as you've got it processed, that barcode's attached and it's got, whatever covers you put on it, it's ready to go out to the shelf. And so then when I receive my next issue, then it'll be the same thing. My call number is actually already in there. Once you've set a call number for these, that's going to stay unless you go and change it. And then I'll put in the barcode for this one and I'll save that. And then that's been received as well. Now, if you ever have a situation where you need to receive multiple at one time, you can do that simply by checking all the boxes for the ones you need to receive. Coming up here to your actions menu and choosing receive selected. And then you have a line for each individual issue. So you put in your barcodes here. And you'll save. Oh, it failed to save issuance. There can be a number of reasons why that happens. It's actually one of the troubleshooting things we'll talk about in a minute, so I'm not going to talk about it right now. But generally speaking, you do have the ability to receive in batch. You can also barcode or receive without barcoding. So you have the ability to just to uncheck this box, and then when you receive an issue, then all you'll do is click OK. Oh, it's still failing. My guess is that there's something going on with this particular. Oh, this is a duplicate. That's why. No, it's not. We'll figure it out in a minute. But you can receive without a barcode. So if your library sort of manages the subscriptions you get, but you don't circulate them, so you don't need barcodes, then you can still manage them within Evergreen, but you don't need a barcode. So this is also if you have things like Library Journal that are really just for staff that are not going to be circulating, you don't need to use a barcode on that if you don't want to, and you can but you can still use this module to kind of make sure that you're maintaining a record of what you're receiving. And if you missed anything, if anything was late, that type of thing. And so it is useful to have even those things that don't circulate listed in here. All right, so we've talked about receiving multiple issues and we've talked about receiving with no barcodes. So this brings us in our last 2 minutes to troubleshooting. I won't go through all of the troubleshooting examples that I had, but I will go through the one that I have first, which I think is actually maybe related to what we're seeing here. If you cannot create a new prediction pattern, so if you've gotten to the end of your subscription year, you've received everything from last year, and you're going in to basically set your prediction pattern for this year so that you can get your list of issues, and you're getting a fail error on that, then often what's happening is that your previous year's subscription, rather than using the template, you created those manually. You didn't use a prediction pattern to create those. You just said, all right, I've got April, so I'm putting in April. When you get to the end of the year, Evergreen needs a lot of information from last year's holdings in order to create a new pattern. If last year's holdings were created manually, it's not going to have that information. And as a result, it can't create a new pattern for this coming year. It's pretty easy to fix it. You just need to add a single issue manually, but apply a holding code to it. Once you've done that, then you can create a prediction pattern from that newly created issue. So, obviously, if you run into this, feel free to submit a ticket and we'll take care of it for you. But generally speaking, that's what we found is going on when you have a situation where you can't create a new prediction pattern for a new year. Second issue is that, oh, there we go, that a previous issue was received without a barcode. If that's the case, then you will not be able to add that, or then you are able to add that barcode manually. So if you generally have barcodes and somebody basically just in trying to receive it failed to click this box and clicked OK and didn't even notice that they hadn't put in the barcode, and then later you go back and realize, oh, this issue doesn't have a barcode, then you can add that in manually after the fact. So it is fixable. Basically, you'll just check the box for the missing barcode. And then you would select reset items. And then when you reset the item, you'll be able to re-receive it and include the barcode in that re-receive. This also works if you accidentally receive something that you have not received. So if you received the wrong issue or something like that, if you clicked the wrong one, then you can reset that one so that it no longer shows as received. And that does bring us to our time. So I'm going to leave it there, but we do have a question in chat, so I'll take a few minutes to answer that. And if there are further questions, we can discuss them. Pat asks, if you're in your distributions, are you saying the same issue will go from circulation to youth services, etc.? Yes. So that's what you're saying. If you have a distribution stream set up, if you have multiple copies and each of them are going to different places, there's a way to set that up as well. And I think it's actually a very similar setup. I have not done that myself, so I don't know off the top of my head how it works, but it is an option as well. So if each different department gets their own copy of Library Journal or something like that, you can set up multiple copies to go to different departments. And even within those departments, then you can set up a distributions stream that allows it to go, say, from staff member to staff member. And I don't know how often that's really used by people right now, but if that's something that you set up and have luck with, let me know. Or if it's something you set up and have a lot of questions with, also let me know and we will. Oh, you do use it all the time. Good. All right. I will hang out for another few minutes if there are more questions, and I will get this recording out in a day or two, just however long it takes to process and get the captions up and everything. But I appreciate everybody's attendance here today. Yes, Pat, if you have the ability to just kind of send me a step-by-step how you set that up, I'd love to see it kind of in action, because I can mess with it on my end, but I'm not actually sending things around, and I don't have physical magazines to be practicing with. So sometimes my setup of it is not a true reflection. So yeah, if you want to send me kind of a step-by-step of how you use that process, I'd love to see it. All right, I appreciate everybody being here today, and please do feel free to send more questions, post them in Basecamp or email or tickets. And if you are new to serials and interested in setting it up, but would like some help with that, reach out to me and we can get that set up as well.